If we're talking about films which set a standard, those are different standards by which filmmakers kind of aim themselves toward. And so the film, of course, that is the one that comes to mind the most would be Citizen Kane. It's a film from 1941, and anyone that's passionate about a film has probably heard of it. In fact, it's been one of the most written about, talked about, and basically present films of all time because it always has appeared in the last, say, at least 10 years at the top of the best films of all time lists. And it has elicited a kind of interest from every film school student, from every film course, basically has Citizen Kane in its repertoire. So it's not unfamiliar to anyone that is familiar with film. But I think for younger people, this is something that is going to be the first time they have seen it. It's amazing. I have students that have mentioned that at film school, there are lots of students that go, "What's the big deal? I don't understand why this film has so much kind of comment about it and why people, talk about it so much. It's okay." But I think what those students don't understand is how phenomenal this film is in terms of the fact that it is highly original, it was highly inventive, and it left such a powerful impact on the filmmakers that came after it. There's certain kinds of reasons, I think, that this existed and that this film is so exceptional. One of them has to do with its creator, Orson Welles, but then it has to do with its photographer, its cinematographer, who was Greg Toland. These two people were very unusual in their own right. Toland had developed a kind of technique that he used in the films of John Ford, his ability to keep people in focus very far away and in front of the camera as well, so that all of that dimension was shown in his films. That's a technique he had developed. Orson Welles was another case. He was a boy wonder who was only 25 when he came to Hollywood. He had founded a theater company in New York. He had founded the theater company had done a number of radio programs that were sensational. The most sensational was one called The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, in which the program was set out like a documentary. It had newspaper reporters, it had announcers, it had all of these details that made it seem super realistic. And it affected people because they really thought it was really happening. There is the rumor, a lot of myths come up about these things. The myth was that people exited the cities because they were so frightened and they were so sure that we had been invaded by Martians. That actually did not happen, but it was great press, and it was a great way that the radio program could be hyped. It did cause a great deal of anxiety, and it caused enormous amounts of publicity for Orson Welles. He had also directed the first black production of Macbeth in Harlem. He had done a number of things that make him quite exceptional before he ever got to Hollywood. The things that I like to talk about were the fact that as a teenager, he decided he did not want to go to college and he wanted to travel in Europe. He went to Ireland and he did a walking tour of Ireland. He got to Dublin. He walked into the Dublin theater, the Repertory Theater in Dublin, and introduced himself and basically hired himself. And it was not longer that he was actually directing productions for that company. So, he had a kind of personality that was far bigger than life and that made people want to help him. Now, he arrived in Hollywood in the most unusual conditions ever. He had become so famous and so notorious as it was that the Hollywood contract at RKO gave him complete control of a film that he wanted to make. That meant that nobody told him what to do, nobody had supervision over his production, and that he had absolute freedom. Now, this created a situation in Hollywood that was so unusual that basically it caused incredibly bad will toward him. Let's look at Hollywood at that period of 1940. The period in Hollywood had been completely dominated by studios. It's called the studio system. And this meant that the people that worked in film were extremely overworked. You started a film, you didn't have any control over what you worked on. You were signed a film, you had to work on it until it was over. And the minute it was over, here's a new film for you to film. All the technicians, all the cinematographers, everybody that worked on film were under this system. It was a very disabilitating and soul-killing situation because you did not have very much choice. And so you felt that often that you were spending your life with producing mediocre products that were supposed to make money on the theaters that were owned by all of the movie studios. It was a monopoly system, and it was just incredibly discouraging. So now you have an artist like Greg Toland, who is able to do much of what he would like to do on some films, but he was never necessarily given a choice. Yes, like a director like John Ford would ask for him, and he would work with him on that film. But no one ever mentioned the word art in Hollywood. It was always just basically you were doing your job, and you may have a wonderful effect. You may do something that was very, very good and you were very proud of. But the whole idea of an artist working and having complete freedom was unheard of. And it just made so many enemies for Orson Welles already in the film industry. So now he gets together with Greg Toland, and Greg Toland has just barrels full of ideas that he was never able to use in film. He knew that he had these ideas, and here he has a young guy that is open to invention and that basically is all ears, wants to learn everything he can about making films. This combination of these two people is what produced the masterpiece that is Citizen Kane. They're working together so closely. They're doing, they're trying things. They're experimenting with things. And what they fill this film with are visual concepts that are pretty much absent in all of the other films of the time. And this is one of the things that makes Citizen Kane so exceptional. They worked with visual concepts from the very beginning. And these concepts make the film so rich so that you can go back to this film again and again and again, and there's always something that you'll notice or there's something that you discover because it's so filled with details that are enthralling. The other thing is that the film is set out like an entertainment. It follows a tradition of rags to riches that we've always loved in America. We always want to dream about the boy that has nothing that goes on to become a millionaire. And of course, in our times, this is the story of an American that is bigger than life. Now, this film was based very vaguely on the life of William Randolph Hearst. He was the publisher of a vast empire of newspapers, and he had made millions from other industries that he had invested in. He also had built this particular palace that was in California called San Simeon, and he had also invested in an art collection that was extravagant. And he was wonderfully, marvelously placed to be a role model for this film. The film was originally called American, and it brings you into a lot of themes from American that Americans hold dear, that perhaps they should question more. It questions very much the idea of wealth as being, as bringing complete happiness to people. It deals with so many ideas about the personal and the public persona. All of these things of which we find very interesting today. In fact, they are prominent in our ideas about celebrity and about hero worship and about heroes in general. It is especially interesting to watch its idea about idealism and how idealism can be broken and how it changes over the years and it can really become something else entirely. It also deals with overblown egos, which of course we are dealing with constantly in our public life. I think this is what makes the film so rich. It has so many themes that it explores that are basically universal in the idea of American history. I think that the other thing that you want to look for people that are just seeing Citizen Kane for the first time, you want to notice the opening of the film. The opening film is extremely radical. It has 3 sections that are unforgettable. One of them is the way it evokes the mansion that that Kane built. And you want to watch the light in the window of the castle that is in the upper right-hand corner. That light never changes, even though the position of it never changes, even though all of the images around it, which are model making at their very, very best in the Hollywood system, as each scene changes and you go nearer and nearer the turret of the castle or the window in the castle. When you get there, there are these changes of light that are totally unrealistic, but make complete dramatic sense. And you are inside, you see Kane on his deathbed. You see a very huge profile of his mouth as he whispers a word on his deathbed. And then a snow globe falls down some steps and crashes. Snow globes don't crash and break open unless they were thrown from a 42-foot building. But it's very effective dramatically. A nurse enters the door, and then all of a sudden, Kane is, covered by a sheet. The light goes up, the light goes down by some magical means, and instantly we are thrown into a newsreel. Here's where the radicalness of Kane basically set a total precedent. You see a newsreel that lets you know the entire plot of the movie. We are shown the plot at the very beginning. And then the newsreel finishes, and we have a scene that is filmed almost completely in silhouettes against incredible smoke that basically has shafts of light coming through. And so this scene is extremely visually radical. So already you're thrown into a film that has some other vision about it that Hollywood had not seen. The film has some other things that you want to really notice. It has a few scenes. For example, there's a scene on the stage of the opera that is filmed twice. Once that implies it's filmed from the front, and once it's implied it's filmed from the back. This little section of film, a tiny section, maybe 2 or 3 minutes in the film, is so carefully orchestrated so that the movement is fantastic in the frame. You want to notice at the end of the film the use of imagery. Kane walks through he walks by reflecting mirrors that show him hundreds of times in the distance. This, of course, is an image that captures one of the themes of the film. How many Kanes are there? And can we ever understand a full personality that is so large and so complex? So many techniques are used in this film that later galvanized the industry. For example, uh, Kane was sort of, it got rave reviews in the paper. It was really got astounding reviews. The Hearst organization was fighting to keep it off the screen. It refused to review it. The movie chain theaters refused to show it. And so it basically died in the theaters. And it was 4 years later when it arrived in Europe, 1945, it was shown in France. It gave birth to the new wave, wave which comes sort of at the end of the 50s that transformed the film industry. One of the new wave directors, Francois Truffaut, saw the film 10 times. He went every single time it was shown in the theater. I mean, it shows what an effect it had on filmmakers. When it was shown in the Eastern Bloc, filmmakers flocked to the showing and were galvanized by the film. It explains a little bit about its influence and how influential it was on the whole, affecting films that aimed higher, that wanted to be masterpieces. It was the standard of film that even today you may use as a standard to weigh how far you want to go with film. I hope that you enjoy your first screening of it. And if you're coming back to it, I hope that you enjoy it and study it even more.